Okay, so the first of patch 9.2's big cinematics is out, and you know what, it's an interesting enough one. There's a few implications. I think there's a lot of things that maybe feel a little clunky first time you see it, but they do actually have sense and explanation. Of course, there's also a lot of opinions swirling around the place, you know, maybe missed opportunities, things like that. So there's really a lot for us to dive into this, and also just some mechanics of it to explain, because I know for a few plot points in this, you know, not everything's been picked up by everyone. Okay, so basically, Kingsmorn, right? Kingsmorn is the Morn blade of Charlemagne, which was Varian's blade. Now, you're probably wondering, some people get confused about it splitting in two and all of that, you know, is being able to split it into like a Mjolnir thing, meaning you're worthy? No, not really. It splits in two. Basically, that's just all the stuff from Varian Rin's backstory. At one point, there was basically two Varians with two different swords. Whenever Onyxia kind of brought them back together into the one Varian, then, you know, the sword is merged, right? So, of course, Anduin ends up picking up that sword after his father dies in the Broken Shore. Now, this is an extremely important plot point for this cinematic, because the way that Varian appears in the Broken Shore is decently similar to the way that he appears in this cinematic, and that's actually quite important, because when we see Varian and Saurfang, I think there's going to be quite a lot of confusion. Now, to get us up to speed, basically, Zovaal, at the very end of the Anduin fight, basically decides, right, you are, you're fully dominated, fully mind-controlled, you're going to do your thing, okay? And that means it's time for Anduin to resist. And this is after, of course, we, the players, have been fighting, along with Uther, Jaina, and Sylvanas. So ultimately, despite our best efforts, yes, we weaken Anduin and all of that, but he still can be full dominated whenever Zovaal tries to really focus in on his power. And this is where we almost enter the realm of Anduin's mind, his sort of inner experience, as this happens, as he's trying to resist the domination. Now, this domination magic, of course, this has been used on characters like Ner'zhul and Arthas in a bit of a weaker form. It's, I suppose, the same form of magic that bound Death Knights to the will of the Lich King, as we saw in Wrath of the Lich King. So we see these two spirits come in, of Varian and Saurfang. Now, to a lot of people, this is a confusing moment because, well, let's just think about it. So, Saurfang, is he not a trinket? You know, Old Warrior Soul, the trinket that comes from Sanctum of Domination? So that's one thought. The other thought is, well, Varian, like, what happened to his soul? Did he get completely consumed and burnt up with Fel, because Fel kind of consumes souls? Did he go to the Shadowlands? If so, when? Then a lot of other people thinking, well, hang on a second. Saurfang died after the Arbiter was deactivated via the defeat of Argus. Therefore, why, he just went straight to the Maw. So how is he here? Whereas Varian, of course, died before the Machinery of Death went offline. So kind of two different fates for these souls. And the answer, I think, is actually none of the above. It's not maybe mega clear, but I think that's basically barking up the wrong tree, because these are almost like sort of light echoes, reflections of the people who wielded the blade. The three characters in this shot are the three people who have wielded Charlemagne. And if you think about the Broken Shore cutscene, where, of course, now, Varian has died, Anduin is king, Anduin goes to his father's blade, he picks it up, and, he sees this vision of Varian. Now, if we think about that through the lens of the mechanics of the Shadowlands, Varian was disenchanted by Gul'dan, and either the Fel completely, burnt through his soul as fuel, because Fel seems to do that, or he went to the Shadowlands. So, how did he talk to Anduin? I think generally the thought is that it's some sort of light echo, some sort of essence of his soul, shard of his soul, whatever, that has kind of remained within the blade. And I think the same thing then we see happen with Saurfang. So I think that's how those two characters are coming in. Also, there's times when souls have been depicted in this sort of bluish way, whereas these guys are depicted in more sort of golden-ish way. That's one explanation. If it is their souls, then yeah, that's a little bit more confusing in terms of the mechanics of the Shadowlands, but it being Charlemagne, that actually does give us a pretty convenient way out of this sticky situation. Okay, so Anduin's then able to just break free. some people then thinking, right, is this just like a Dragon Ball Z moment, you know? Character looks at the screen, shouts enough, is able to muster enough will and determination to get through whatever problem they're facing. Well, there could be a bit of that, obviously, but what then changes that is, you know, his spirit is helped by these two characters. And that's actually something that if you think back to Darien, right? Well, how did Darien stop being mind-controlled by Arthas? Well, it's the whole situation with his father, you know? All the stuff with Ashbringer. So, I think Anduin is a far more extreme example of this mechanic happening, but those sort of, you know, the bonds that almost tie us to our own soul, tie us to who we are, you know, the family, recent experiences that were deeply meaningful. Obviously for Darien, that was enough for him to break out of mind control Death Knight mode, and I think here we're basically seeing a similar thing happen for Arthas. Not Arthas. Anduin, whoops. Wrong blonde prince. Okay, I suppose I should talk about the obvious then. Arthas. Yes, Arthas is in this. Cue joke about, oh wow, doesn't Arthas have a cool model? Yeah, so Arthas is here. He's like the whirly soul thing that's been powering Kingsmorn, or Shalamorn, or you know, whatever you want to call it. Kingsmorn is the official name. Now, if you look at Anduin picking up the blade from the Broken Shore, I believe in patch 7.2, you'll see as soon as Anduin picks it up, the light almost enters it, right? So it's, you know, got that sort of nice, you know, yellowy golden color, which kind of denotes that. Of course, when it's Kingsmorn, that source of fuel or whatever, that is Arthas. That's Arthas' soul, which is one of the souls that, of course, Zovaal has. Now, that very much means that this blade is being powered by Arthas' soul, I believe. Or at least it's a very important thing, and, well, something is powered by Arthas' soul anyway, because we end up knowing what actually happens to it. Of course, blades powered by souls or imbued with souls, I mean, that's actually quite a few weapons from the Legion artifacts have got some sort of mechanic like that, so it's something we have seen before in the lore. Now then, this whole situation, why does he split Charlemagne in two? Well, pretty much he sort of, you know, in splitting it in two, he basically unleashes Arthas. That's essentially what you need to know. He unleashes Arthas, the sword's powered down, the domination is broken, and he gets his normal skin back. That premium skin that he purchased is gone. Some people were hoping for Anduin to have just a little bit more of a transformation as a character, you know, more of a visual sort of representation of things. We're not seeing that, but we absolutely are going to see a very large mental sort of impact from this from Anduin. So that'll be actually fairly major, I think, within the next two expansions, and I'm almost 99% sure I know why, so I'll fill you in on that a little bit. Arthas, then. Now, this scene with Arthas ended up being strange for a few reasons. So first of all, you know, Anduin notices it's Arthas, Jaina passes some comment, Uther passes comment, basically noting how, you know, Arthas' soul has ultimately just, you know, fueled the Jailer's forges, that sort of thing. And you know, by this stage, it's all but gone. And that's what all these characters realize. There's not really anything of Arthas left, right? It's just this broken thing with nothing to it. And that means that there's no Arthas to, you know, be put on trial. There's no Arthas to have a discussion with or get that sort of closure from, really, for any of these characters. And then, of course, Sylvanas. Because it is a cinematic with Sylvanas, so we do need an extended monologue bit from her, which, you know, to me, sometimes I think in these scenes, like, okay, but she's talking to the camera. This doesn't make much sense. But, you know, whatever. I get it. Essentially, Sylvanas kind of meditating over, you know, well, you know, I hated you. I did a lot of bad things. I became more like you, which, you know, in itself, it does feel a little bit weird, Sylvanas saying some of those things. I think there's pretty fundamental differences in those two characters. It ties them together, but obviously some fundamental differences, but I think they just didn't have the word count to really mine the depth there, which, you know, it is what it is. Blizzard do short, snappy cinematics. They don't do longer things that dive into the real interactions and kind of, you know, get all of the great tasty bits that they could get out of their story. I'll talk about that in a little bit later. Now, for a lot of people, and certainly a bit of myself too, you're like, all right, Arthas, okay, is that it? Now, my initial reaction was, oh, phew. They didn't ruin Arthas. You know the way with Garrosh? Like, Garrosh didn't do anything lore-defining when we saw him in Sanctum of Domination. He just gave a last fuck you. You know, he wasn't ruined. He was still Garrosh, right? In every way, Garrosh was Garrosh. And a lot of us just like that because, you know, the character didn't get fiddled with. And because the Jailer is this sort of parasitic character who gets a lot of his, canonical meaning and importance via him actually being responsible for a bunch of things that we did in the past, even though we didn't really know. You know, he was tied into Arthas, tied into Ner'zhul, tied into all of these characters, the Dreadlords, even the fall of Sargeras to a degree. You know, he's kind of this lame parasitic villain. He almost makes everything else worse because he cheapens events that we thought we understood by his existence. It's kind of like the thing with Zovaal. So I was a little bit worried, they could have done something with Arthas that would have messed it up. Now, Arthas 2 is a character that they've been funky with since the end of Warcraft 3. I'm not going to mess around there. We've had slightly different interpretations and thoughts about what his goals were, what was actually going on in the Helm, all of that stuff. Of course, then, I was really worried after Ner'zhul, because Ner'zhul's, I think, just a great character, and I think he was utterly, wasted. I basically unzipped and took a big piss on him with Sanctum of Domination. And he definitely is gone, in the same way that Arthas is definitely gone. As the characters say, like, the wielders, or is it Zovaal? Yeah, Zovaal basically says, all the people who wield this blade, you all end up annihilated. Which I think ultimately does mean that there's no Arthas left. There's no Ner'zhul left. That's it. Zilch. Now, for a lot of people, that's quite... a lot of people would have wanted more. So while I was initially happy that they didn't ruin the character that I liked, I absolutely recognize a lot of people saying, well, you could have done a hell of a lot more. And this is where I'd come in and say that Uther was the way to save this, actually. And a lot of what happened in Uther's patch 9.1 quest, I think, is super relevant here. And it's how they could have saved this moment. And I wish that they would have had a longer runtime here so they could have explored this a little bit. I mean, I know they already did in that campaign, but, it would be good to punctuate this moment a bit more, and I think just have a little bit more balanced dialogue between the characters. It's just a little Sylvanas heavy, and a lot of other people have been wronged by Arthas. The thing there basically is, Arthas and this fate of his, where he... Because you got to remember, as soon as the Helm of Domination comes off Arthas, the top Ice Crown in patch 3.3, he's like, thank God it's over, right? That's the vibe that I totally get. It's like the long nightmare has passed, he can see again, and he's feeling horror of what he's done, perhaps. And, from that point, you're like, oh, okay, interesting. Is that, it's not a final, like, Vader moment where the character redeems himself in some sort of way, but at least it's a recognition of what the character did, and often that's what you really want to see. But after that, what happened? Well, what could have happened, some sort of story involving the soul of Arthas. What actually happened is Uther prioritized vengeance over justice. He was confused. He didn't know why. Obviously, there was, mechanics regarding his soul in Frostmourne that were a very major part of this that ultimately meant that Uther was a pawn of the Jailer for quite a while. But when Uther cast Arthas' soul down into the Maw, ultimately, Uther sealed his fate. It's kind of Uther's fault that Arthas ended up in this situation. So, in a way, you could say the more meta commentary in this is that in choosing vengeance over a more pure form of justice, what Uther essentially did was, rob a degree of catharsis. Now, you could say, it robs a degree of catharsis for the invested fan base who are interested in the character, and therefore that doesn't feel good. That's totally one option. You can maybe say that it, it kind of robs Arthas of something that he could have had, something positive he could have had, something interesting he could have had in his story, and that's really the point in the whole vengeance over justice thing, which I suppose also ties into the whole, vengeance and renewal thing that they did with Tyrande, also in patch 9.1. So that's basically what's up with Arthas. It's a sort of thing where there's a lot of little pieces you've got to sort of put together as you go through a cinematic like this. And sometimes it's, for some people, I don't want to say for some people, as that sounds bad. No, for me, I felt like it sat better with me after like half an hour than it sort of did initially, so to speak. So, my initial thought was like, oh, wait, what are the mechanics of these souls being here? Regarding, the two with Anduin. And then, with Arthas, I was like, oh, phew, they didn't ruin him. They didn't bring him back and ruin him. Phew, thank God. Great. Which then turned into a bit of, it's a bit disappointing that we didn't have more happen there. And also, it's a bit disappointing that, Jaina and Uther didn't have much to say, really, considering, Jaina, Arthas, relationship, very big, massive for Jaina. Could we have had more, please? Probably will later on in this patch, right? But within the bounds of the cinematic, I suppose. Yeah, all those things just felt funky, and Shadowlands itself has just felt funky to me. But overall, I think I've worked out why all of this is going on. There's all the general issues, but then there's also a little bit of, okay. As much as the devs have said that Shadowlands was always supposed to be expansion, one major patch, and one major patch, I think we pretty much all know that's a load of bull. There's even the whole funny thing with the number of portal spaces in Oribos, but it would very much be breaking format, and the idea that the game director can just go into an interview and say, yes, I actually planned to give you less content within the same span of time this time around. Hey. That just doesn't ring true to me. That just means, Ian obviously can't admit that, Shadowlands had to be cut down a bit, so he's going to have to toe this line. They're going to have to toe this line that was all supposed to be a story in 3 parts, or 3 acts, whatever. That's just how it's going to be. But, to me, it doesn't really feel like that. So that's what I think of that bit. Anyway. Now, for Anduin then, right, there's actually going to be big things going on in his future. So Anduin has been portrayed as really having an inner struggle for a decent amount of time, actually. Since ages ago, we've seen him use little flickers of void. In Shadows Rising, he uses some void. And that's the sort of light void thing, which is in many parts of Warcraft, such as a certain power couple who are currently leading the Alliance, basically. And the other side of that, though, is Anduin, trying to be a good soft boy, but then also having to pick up a sword and kill people because, he's the king, it's a war, and oh dear, reality's a bitch. That's been a lot of Anduin's experience. Of course, a lot of that has been personified in his father, or his his relationship with his father. Now, the next stage for Anduin is going to be one of trauma, because Anduin has already carried many traumas with him. He's had many things to get over. That time Garrosh pretty much almost killed him? There's that. There's many other things. His mum. There's his dad. Right? His dad just gone. Disappears, whatever. When he's a little boy. That's going to be really traumatic, isn't it? But that's a lot of trauma for the poor bastard. And then we've got to get into what all this domination magic does. Because at the end, the sort of epilogue bit of patch 9.1, there's the little cutscene where Anduin basically talks about he feels his soul is just slipping away. He feels the coldness. He feels the long-term effects of the domination magic. Right? And that's bad stuff. He feels his soul is being damaged. This is obviously something that even happened to, happened to Sylvanas. It's happened to a few characters, actually. So, this new Anduin, as much as the Anduin we've seen in-game, you have to think about the deep well of trauma and horrible experiences that he has had. Even some things of guilt. Maybe times where if he had have listened to some of advisors and been a little bit more hawkish, he could have been a dickhead in the moment, but saved a whole bunch of pain later on. Maybe he regrets how he handled the whole Arathi situation with Sylvanas before BFA. So he's got all these traumas anyway. Then there's all the impacts that domination magic and all that jazz is going to have in his soul. You're sort of wielding Frostmourne 2. Wielding Frostmourne 1 did Arthas in, didn't it? Or at least damaged him. So he's going to have a really hard time. And the problem here is actually really major, because there's a group. And, right, this is quite a big one, actually. You can search our video. It's maybe 2 years ago now. But there's this group, the Scarlet Brotherhood, right? And they're these like super hardcore Scarlets, and their whole thing was during BFA. It just had all the conspiracy theories and stuff. They had these pamphlets lying about. But they basically were like, we're going to depose Anduin Wrynn. We're going to get rid of all these jokers and the true Menethil heir. We have him. You just don't know who he is. We're going to bring him back. So there's that. And because they're Scarlets, they're light extremists. Then, of course, there's Turalyon. Now, look, we here don't go around trying to character assassinate Turalyon. We're simply saying he is a man who is very, deep and, in a way, extreme in his convictions. He literally spent 1,000 years at war. That's a lot of years. So there's a lot going on with Turalyon, and I'm not going to explain it here because if you just go back a wee bit in the channel, we'll throw a few links in the description. There's a whole video just basically being like, hey, Turalyon, this is what's up. So, what? And then, of course, Matthias Shaw comes into this. Matthias Shaw, he really wanted Gen Greymane to be kind of holding the reins of the Alliance, but basically it turns out that Turalyon, he's got the backing of the House of Nobles. So, he was like the Lord Commander of the Armed Forces of the Alliance? And, he's basically the Regent as well. So, he is the Alliance to a degree. So the chances of there being alliance strife, I think, are decently high. Blizzard have quite, well, it was a wee bit ago now, but it's sort of during BFA for a decent while, they've been talking about how they want to do tension within the alliance. We haven't had a lot of that. While the Horde has just been going through war chiefs like mad and having a lot of struggles. We've done 2 sieges of Orgrimmar. The Alliance has been a lot more stable. So the Alliance are definitely due something. They're due something going on, aren't they? So I think that's where things are going to be going with Anduin. Now, I guess just for the points of closure then, Jaina, she got her closure at the end of 3.3. Now, some of that was like in the sort of little additional quest line afterwards that, of course, not all players will have seen. Was that part of Shadowmourne? My brain's kind of fuzzy. Anyway, there was the Jaina closure there. And I think for Jaina, I don't want to say she's over Arthas. Arthas, his specter definitely looms over her life. But she has many years of separation from the very active traumas of that. She was there for the defeat of the Lich King. Of course, Thros brought up some of that trauma again. And undoubtedly seeing, this other young human prince, king now, sort of go through at least a sort of a visually Arthas-y situation. It's definitely going to be hard for her, but that's she's been through that rodeo. Whereas for Sylvanas, she finally knows who she is. Technically. Spiritually, she has to work out who she is, and that's her short-term journey, her arc now. But the sort of the souls being reunited, she's sort of whole again. Which means, she's now whole, a lot more sound of mind, and therefore a lot more able to feel the, sheer horror and terror of all the awful things that she has done, all the pain and misery she's wrought. So I suppose Sylvanas having a few more lines does sort of decently make sense there. I think it's just that because her story has been so wildly unpopular with quite a few of the players, and then as it turns out, again, this is... Remember, Alex Afrasabi was the creative director of WoW. He was literally the person who... had the final say on at least all of the start of BFA. So, she was obviously cast in this direction that then, oh boy, what are we going to do with this? So that's what's up with Sylvanas. I think she's the character who, as much as a lot of us don't want to see her because we're tired of her, the kind of nuts and the bolts of the story, it's like she's the one who's kind of due the time to deal with this shit now. And that all to me just means that they're trying to tell a story, but they don't have the format. It's that simple. This is going to be like the Faulty Towers episode, don't mention the war, but it's FF14, Oh, we're talking about World of Warcraft, don't mention Final Fantasy XIV. That's what it's like. But I do want to mention it a little bit, purely because... Look, I'll be honest, I do think that if that team was given the same runtime that Blizzard has, I do think they do a better job. Straight up, absolutely. But certainly one strength they have is they just have more runtime. After a situation like this, if it were FF14, you would have 15, 25, maybe 35 minutes of voiced cutscenes. you know? And that would mean that when we talk about the missed opportunities, such as Callia Menethil, ARTHAS'S sister, could have been interesting if she was involved. Or even things like, that's quite funny actually. Talia has appeared in Zereth Mortis for world quests, but her character by the campaign actually hasn't arrived in Zereth Mortis yet, so that's a bit weird. I hope her and Bolvar will get more. But Jaina and Arthas stuff not being a major feature of this cutscene. Uther and Arthas stuff not being a major feature of this cutscene. Us seeing, a really, like a nice, well-shot, sort of, just well-paced, whatever, cutscene of Jaina and Uther just talking about what has happened and what this means for the two of them going forward. There's just not the room to do that within World of Warcraft. And that just is tricky, man. And when I think about it, like FF14 has got, especially by the time you get to Shadowbringers and Endwalker, it's got the automated lip syncing that I believe then they can like clean up and do a whole bunch, tuning and work with in post. But they have a way better like pipeline and workflow for doing that sort of thing. That's why they can just say shit patch 5.3 and it has 4.5 hours of cutscenes. All right. They're able, they have the tools, they have the setup to actually just do that, to have those story scenes, to really look at the situation and think, okay, here's all the threads, how are we going to tie them together and make sure it's super satisfying for the player and they are not left at the end of a cutscene thinking, oh, that was weird, or oh, I'm confused. And that's just the thing. Blizzard is trying to tell these kind of like really big, really epic, massive in scope stories where loads of characters, or not loads, but the characters are all tied to each other and all that stuff, but they don't have the runtime in game. They evidently do not have the tools to be able to create, in a reasonable amount of time, cinematics to a reasonable amount of quality with their in-game tools, meaning that they've got to rely on these pre-rendered ones, which are a hell of a lot more time-consuming and expensive to make, like the one that we're talking about today. They just don't have the tools. Now, I would say then the problem is they have not adjusted their ends to fit their means. And I think that ultimately just means that the storytelling in WoW ends up feeling a bit clunky. And it's that situation where when I actually sit down, I think about all the things, like, oh yeah, Darian breaking free from his domination and Wrath of the Lich King. The mechanics of Charlemagne and, the sort of soul echo things that we sort of saw in 7.2. And, I think about, all the arc stuff with Uther in this expansion. All those things, like you let it lie, you let it rest, and it all kind of fits a little bit better, and the cinematic feels a bit better. But I just think there's just a wee bit of clunk. Sometimes just a wee bit. It's that weird thing with Blizzard. It's like the story stuff feels first draft and then super polished, right? It's like, you can sort of see the nuts and bolts, but then with kind of like the script and stuff, or not the script, I would say the narrative design perhaps. It's the narrative design that's clunky. The script is doing the best that it can. The actors are doing the best they can. The animators are doing the best they can. The modelers, the riggers, everyone involved, the post-process or the post-FX people, they're all doing a great job. It's just that the narrative design has got that level of clunk. And I think it's because there's so many things they know they could do at all times, but also they just don't have the tools to do all of those things. And that just means they have to make these awkward decisions. And then they need to backfill that by having stay a while and listen scenes at the very end of the patch, where, the stay a while and listen is kind of like, hello, I'm going to espouse to you my Wowpedia entry. Whereas a lot of the ground that is covered in those stay a while and listen scenes, I think would be far better done if it was more organically woven through the story that we players actually experience. Plus, I guess another thing with FF14 is it actually does have a, it's not, like its core cast is pretty fixed. And that just means you spend a lot of time with those characters. Your character knows, those characters. You don't have those weird situations where it's like, Jaina, I've been with you through many of the most harrowing events in your life. Why do you treat me like you don't know who I am? You know what I mean? Those awkward things. So, that's it. Look, I would say there could be a degree of turning a new leaf at the end of Shadowlands, right? I mean, it's... Warcraft 3 is well and truly put to bed at this stage, isn't it? I mean, in most ways it is. So if they're going to start with a Dragon Isles or something, I would like that to be a big leap forward. I'd like to see a lot of change. Be that way more cutscenes, way more cinematics, or be that, hey, we can only do this much, so what we're going to do is keep our stories a wee bit more simple, our A-plots and such. We're going to really ensure that all our motivations and all that stuff is in the game. We're going to keep that cast size down a little bit. We're going to have, the expansive zones that actually tell the A-plot. Unlike Shadowlands, where, the A-plot was there in the zones, but, I mean, oh dear. Imagine if at the end of patch 9.0 you fully understood Zoval and his story and, what his stakes are in all of this. That would have been pretty cool. Maybe things would have landed more. You get what I mean? So it's basically that thing where, they really needed to nail that core moment for Anduin. They really did. And I think they actually did a really good job. I like the scene. Yeah, it's a bit more cheesy, but you know what? Be a little indulgent. Those are 3 really cool characters that, each of those characters I really like. So I really enjoyed that bit, And once, you're sure that all of the lore bits have clicked into place, which I think they mostly do for that bit, then you sort of realize, well, they only had 2.5 minutes, apparently. I don't know, because they're a multi-dollar company, remember. They only had 2.5 minutes. So I didn't leave them with too much else. And I think to have the end of this patch work, they obviously need to have that Sylvanas time. And that means that Jay and Uther have got to pay the price. So it's just that, cascading awkwardness of them not having the format to tell the story that they want to tell. And then some behind the scenes stuff being quite iffy as well, meaning that for Sylvanas, we're going to find out what the deal is properly in its totality in a book at the end of this month. And that's a bit whack. It's a bit whack. So there you go. I mean, that's really my opinions here, my breakdown. I thought this could have been a lot better if some of it was just a little bit different in terms of narrative design. I also think, being real, they could have really fucked ARTHAS. It could have been awful. Could have been awful. It could have made you go, think, oh no, they've killed Warcraft 3. I enjoyed that when I was young, and now I'm sad. That's what it could have felt like, and it... Maybe the way to put it. I don't feel it was trampled on. I understand feeling very underwhelmed at the handling of ARTHAS. But all I would say is, if you're mega underwhelmed at how ARTHAS was handled, number 1, I get you, I feel you. Number 2, I have a feeling you probably didn't like how patch 9.1 ended. So, do you want a 9.1 ending style thing to happen to ARTHAS? It's that weird thing where you think you want something, but then you get it. It's like getting the J.J. Abrams mystery box answered, and you're like, right. That was more interesting when it was a box. I think that's kind of the situation we're dealing with here, and that's why I'm hoping for that nice, clean, fresh slate as time goes on. I guess one other thing I'd say, really quick thing, this is a nitpick. I actually do think that, the visuals and all that were super strong. I think they did a great job. They storyboarded, this, right? The, splitting the blades. They storyboarded that, obviously, to mirror Sylvanas splitting the Helm of Domination, right? Which, in itself, right, that's kind of like the follow-up to Frostmourne is shattered. The Helm of Domination is shattered and eventually gets, I won't spoil that bit, I suppose, because that's later on. I will just say that because there are so few minutes of, cutscene in existence, that when the cutscenes start to reference shots in each other, if that's sort of big things between, a few movies, then it's that's fine, But for me, I was instantly taken out of the viewing experience because I was like, oh, that's a cinematography reference. That could just be me really liking, cinematography, being interested in all of that, and therefore having an eye for this, and maybe I just pulled myself out of that moment inadvertently, but it was just a thought. Anyway, that's the cinematic. Let me know what you thought. Maybe I'll do a YouTube community post poll. Yes. Remember those? Spiffing Brit made a video about them, and then for about a month, every YouTuber under the sun did 50 community posts a day. Then you guys all said, hey, enough of the community posts. We're sick of this shit. And then most of us sort of, we kind of got the message and stopped, didn't we? Well, maybe I'll do one of those with the poll, and I'll fill you in on how it goes later. Okay, have a wonderful day, and hey, next week, we're going to find out what the crack is, aren't we? Right? When Zoval, when he kicks it, when he pops his clogs, when he croaks it. Kind of interesting to see how they wrap this one up for sure. Okay, have a wonderful day. Goodbye.